G'day, welcome back to this episode of This International Student Life, and we'll try to wrap up this series on international students arriving in Melbourne, Australia, and Melbourne, of course, in this episode. We'll try not to go on for too long. Really appreciate you listening, experimenting with different types of content as this channel evolves. And so to finish up with, we're just looking at changes in numbers of the students and which countries they're coming from, and we'll just start off this episode by just looking at some of the incentives that the federal Australian government has introduced to try and lure is that's a funny word, but to entice, to make it more attractive. To make the effort and overcome those really expensive airfares and some of the very difficult, not so easily negotiated as they were before the pandemic, of course, to get back into Australia. Now, the government's decided for the time being to waive the $630 visa application fee. And more good news, that students will actually be able to work and earn income outside of their studies. The government has removed the 40-hour-a-fortnight cap on working hours, and that's due to expire sometime around the end of this month, April 2022 or May 2022. So keep an eye on those, on that. If you're depending on working an outside job, it's not a permanent change. Make sure that you get all your details on that in that regards. Your international student support team is a great resource to help you with information such as that. Student accommodation has been really affected, obviously, by the pandemic, and naturally there's a lot of vacancies in international student accommodation. There's many, so many developments over the last 5 to 10 years in Melbourne, specialising in student accommodation facilities, and we've found some comments from Cedar Pacific Chief Operating Officer Paul Fell, and his company developed 3 Melbourne student accommodation buildings and uni lodge facilities, and we're familiar with these. One of these uni lodge facilities is actually right across the road from the Victoria University Footscray campus, which we captured some footage of a couple of weeks ago, which is actually next door to the new Footscray Hospital being built, a huge new development on the other side of the road to the Footscray campus of Victoria University. And it turns out that demand for accommodation is exceeding the expectations. Uni Lodge Melbourne City is 51 stories, 900 beds, and it opened in 2022, and it's already at 74% occupancy. And nearby there's another Uni Lodge near Royal Melbourne Hospital, that's at 71%. That it turns out that about 1 in 10 foreign students, about 7 in 10 students are foreign. And this comprises of 18% are Chinese, 14% are from other Pacific nations. Now, pre-pandemic, it turned out that Chinese students made up about 30% of residents in uni lodge accommodation. A barrier for international students is the border rules to Australia are still a big factor. And it's been a lot of discussion over the past 2 years, and even though the demand is strong, particularly in Melbourne, according to Mr. Fell of Pacific Cedar that manages Uni Lodge, there's going to be a lot of question marks over this for the time being. Interestingly, PricewaterhouseCoopers, their modelling from 2020 found that for every dollar international students spent on tuition fees, only tuition fees, this contributes $1.15 to Victoria's state economy. And in 2019, the international student education space in Australia, in Victoria, was $13.7 billion, that industry, but that's pre-pandemic. Now, a vocal advocate of international students returning to Melbourne has been the Lord Mayor of Melbourne, Sally Capp, and she's back in the media again today. But back in early March, her comments were that Melbourne has missed its international student population as workers, as customers, as friends and valued members of the community. And she says that the buzz in city buildings, particularly around those university centres, there's a buzz with domestic and international students returning to study on campus, to attend on site. And we can certainly attest to that. There was definitely a palpable energy, a real sense of coming back to face-to-face learning, and just people getting back together, and that was very noticeable as we were filming the various campuses at each of their orientation days. And finishing off, we'll wrap this episode up here of our three-part series. Victoria University said exact enrolment numbers will only be known after the higher education census date of March 31, which has just passed, so it'll take a few weeks for those numbers to come out. But La Trobe University said that in the start of March they had more than 1,000 new students starting in semester 1 2022, which they reckon is well above their expectations and double last year's figures, which is self-evident really, isn't it? And that comprised the most popular study faculties were business, nursing and education for international students at La Trobe University. Whereas at Melbourne University, the international student contingent had increased by 2,000. They've now got 23,000 on campus in Australia compared to the end of 2021, and it's health sciences, commerce, engineering and IT courses that are the most in demand. So that wraps up our three-part series on this particular topic about where India has overtaken China as international students' top country of origin. It's one that we think was of interest to our audience. The only way for us to know for sure is if you leave us a comment in the comments section below. Also, if there's a like or a dislike, that's another way we can find out. But the best way of all to let us know that you really value this type of content, it's the best way is to subscribe. And just to fill you in, that Wise Words Media is a independent, honest broker of information. We're not paid by any university. We are independent of all government bodies. We don't receive any funding from any sources. So any information that you see on our platform, you can take it as read, that we're purely independent. We like to present information as honestly and transparently as we can. We're always looking into the international student space. If there's any topics that are of interest to you, you might be a prospective international student overseas, you might be a parent looking to help your son or daughter select a university in Australia or Melbourne, or you might be an international student recruitment agent, or you might be in the EdTech sector, or you might be looking to spend a semester here to study abroad. Now that Australia's borders are open, we're back in business. What we're hoping to do in the future is similar episodes as we move away from specific topics like orientation week and we've got a series coming up, hopefully the end of April, start of May, about student accommodation. But what we're aiming to do with this channel is to provide some topics of interest, and not so much as commentary, but we're researching and pulling together a lot of information available in the public domain that may or may not be of interest. It's all a bit of testing the water, just throwing things up against the wall as a metaphor, just to see what sticks, see what our audience like. Thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll chat to you next time. This International Student Life is produced by Wise Words Media. This episode contains nil paid promotions. All information in this episode is taken from sources available to the public in the public domain. Wise Words Media accepts no responsibility for any errors or omissions of information in this episode.